We're joined this half hour by John Everson. John, are you on the line?
I am here. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, John. I guess I'll just come right out of the gate. On Friday, we had a little dip in the stock market because of a jobs report from May and June that was changed, and then July was weak. And we've decided we're going to fire that person who put that report out. Is this going to change the jobs report, or what can that do, or what can we look forward to moving forward?
Yeah, it is interesting. If you think about, go back and reflect on Friday, we broke our streak of calm that we had for about the past month. And so my point is, that we had sort of settled into just a little up, a little down. News really wasn't affecting things because there really wasn't lots of major news and so forth. And, of course, Friday was actually almost a knee-jerk reaction, I think, not so much necessarily by the jobs report. While that was kind of the catalyst that set it off, I think it really originally tied back more to Wednesday with the Fed's decision to hold rates steady. And then all of a sudden, 48 hours later, you're seeing things that might imply, okay, is there a disconnect between what the Fed is assessing and analyzing and digesting and some of the numbers that are now coming out that is, I think really what created some of the turmoil that we've seen. Now, here's what's interesting. When you go back and you look at jobs reports in particular, and of course the individual that was discharged from their position over the weekend, I guess Friday it was, I think, was the, as I understand it, head of Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is the entity, the governmental entity that does report jobs numbers and so forth. But here's what's interesting to me. Most people don't pay attention to this. We obviously do. Jobs numbers get revised nearly every month. And so, because they make a report, here's where we are, or we believe we are relative to hires and so forth. And oftentimes, if you pay attention, 3, almost 4 weeks later, there will always be a trailing report of job revision numbers. Now, what is interesting, and there has been, I don't know if you folks remember this or not, back in September and October last year, prior to the election, there were some jobs numbers that were reported. And then post-election, there was an acknowledgement, revised numbers, that basically said that the overestimation of jobs in America was overestimated by 1 million jobs. That's a significant sort of miscalculation. So I think, when we hear these news events, sometimes we have to keep it all into perspective. But right now, we'll have to see exactly where that leads us. But make no mistake, it has reintroduced volatility into the calm that we were enjoying.
Well, but more than that, John, there's introduced doubt in there. I think this revision is to be expected because everybody wants to know a number up front very early, and as you get more numbers in, it's going to be revised. This is something that's always been done. I've heard now Trump is saying Harris benefited from that. Other analysis said the Harris did not benefit from it because the numbers did not help her that much. But that aside, to me, the question is, can we trust the numbers that come out in the future? Because the president's already said, if I don't like your numbers, I'm getting rid of you. So there's going to be a lot of inducement, a lot of encouragement to produce numbers that he likes. So what is that going to do to the market? There's going to be an uncertainty there that people cannot trust the numbers.
I think you're asking the wrong question, Bill. I think the issue is, if you go back to the time around the election, where you're right, the difference was a shift in around 1 million jobs, and back then, again, there was the accusation of politicization, however you say that word, that, oh, look, we had all of this job growth coming up to the election, and then Trump was elected, and then it was, oops, nope, we were wrong, and it turns out that there wasn't all that job growth. So the accusation then by the winning party was, you see, they were all fake numbers. So the question is, I think, less about putting the thumb on the scales. It's the lies, damn lies, and statistics. And I think that these kinds of numbers, BLS numbers, I dealt with them for years and years and years. They have always been, I call them squishy numbers, because they are constantly revising. And is that not the case, John? I mean, this is not a unique circumstance.
No, it is not a unique circumstance at all, and you're 100% right. And you would think that in today's world, with instant information and reporting and so forth, that data analysis would be at the governmental level would be accurate, quick to report and so forth. But that clearly is not the case. And these things have gone on forever. And so I'm going to go back to Mr. Stubblefield's question. If you stop and you think about this, I don't know necessarily, and make no mistake, there's a lot of times commentary that our current administration makes with regard to things that are going on. So whether it's a given number or a given, a decision by a group, the Fed, as whether that's favorable or not and so forth, then in my opinion, a lot of that commentary doesn't need to be made. Let's just stay focused on where we are, where we're going forward, and what we need to do next. So, there is no question that the revisions have always happened. So what we're experiencing right now really isn't anything new. I think what we're experiencing now is someone who is just very open with regard to commentary and thoughts and opinions with regard to where the numbers should be going or should have been, et cetera. And again, I'm not so necessarily sure that that's healthy overall. Let's just take the numbers and decide what needs done next.
So, John, do you think, the stock market has been doing phenomenally well recently, and stocks have been soaring. Do you think this was maybe just a knee-jerk reaction on Friday because of an excuse to sell a little bit?
Very, very good. I do. So I want to go back to sort of my initial comment, which was Friday sort of broke that streak of calm that we've been experiencing. And here's what I actually had to look this up this morning, a couple of numbers to give you some perspective, fellas. So far, year to date, January 1 through Friday, the S&P 500 is up just over 7%. Okay? Now, most people, if you said, it's a 7% a respectable return, most people would say, well, yeah, that's not too bad. That's 7% in basically 7 months. Okay? However, though, so Mr. Hornby, I want to go back to your comment here, your question. If you go back to April the 8th and you bring that number forward, most people would be stunned to realize the S&P 500 from April the 8th of this year through Friday, we're up over 26% in that window of time. And most people don't even realize those things have happened.
John, we're losing you. Maybe move 1 foot to the left.
Okay, yeah, okay.
There you go. Well, you're back.
Okay. In that case, I'll stay where I'm. I am a roamer when I talk, so sorry about that. That's the disadvantage, I guess, to a wireless headset. But most people would say a 7% return is very respectable year to date. But again, most people would not necessarily be aware of the fact, that again, since early April, we're actually up 26% for the S&P 500.
Then, John, your take on, obviously, since we had that, again, knee-jerk reaction April 2nd, I had that big fall. The talk of tariffs, is the market over that? Are we still looking into that? Is that something that will continue to affect the market all year long?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, if you think about it, I think most of the emotional response that we saw to tariff talk literally occurred back from about Valentine's Day through the end of the first week of April, where we did have a really nice sell-off because of the threat and the fear and the uncertainty and so forth. And now that tariffs have actually been applied in some instances on some countries, and the fact that, when you go into the store, again, cost of goods and services, it still doesn't make me feel warm and fuzzy when I get to the checkout to purchase something. I'm not exuberant over how cheap and inexpensive everything is. But I think the realization for most people is that maybe the result of what's being imposed right now is not going to be this economic collapse that was being predicted back beginning at about Valentine's Day. So I think to a large degree, a lot of the response that we're going to see is probably baked in at the moment. But make no mistake, there's still a lot of trade negotiation and discussion going on between the United States and many other countries. And so periodically you're still going to have individual news events that are going to create an emotional response, be that either good or bad.
Yeah, but actions have consequences, right? And the lead story in the Wall Street Journal this morning is that China is choking the supply of critical minerals to Western defense companies. So China's response to, in part to these tariffs is, okay, fine, the critical minerals you need to make for the defense industry you can't get, which now, of course, highlights the folly of being critically dependent on what arguably is our potential enemy for our critical needs.
For critical items. Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think you're right. That does really reinforce that notion that, the whole concept of that we become reliant and dependent. And I don't care whether it's minerals or oil, or as we've been over many years, or drugs being and a lot of those raw materials being outsourced to other countries in many instances. And John, I agree with you. Countries that are adversaries to us. They don't care for us. They would just as soon see us fail. And I've always questioned that myself. So I think that, if you stop and you think about what this current administration appears to be attempting to do, and again, we'll see this in the context of time, is trying to onshore more of those jobs, the production, so that we're less reliant on some of those other countries. But you are absolutely right. I saw that same article that you're referencing this morning, where there was an agreement with regard to these rare earth minerals, and all of a sudden it's being violated. So much for the agreement. And again, anytime you're dependent upon a bit of an adversary, for those types of products, raw materials that you need from a country's point of view, that puts you in a vulnerable position, I think.
And I think you're starting to see a lot of those rare earth minerals actually being mined within the United States. The one thing I think most regular people who go to the grocery store, they care about eggs or gas or things like that. But I have seen, to Bill Stubblefield's point, the price of coffee has gone through the roof recently. At what point do people really care about those things and they start making changes to that day?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think this is interesting. Even myself, I have made some changes based on price. I used to consume a lot of orange juice, and if you guys, some folks have paid attention to the price of orange juice, it's like, that's crazy. So I've very rarely drink orange juice now, and because it's getting to a point where some of these products are reaching a range that's going to force a lot of people, I think, to come to the realization of, okay, maybe it's not a staple that I actually have to have. And it is unfortunate because you think about, again, historically, and you're right, eggs and butter and flour and sugar and things of the coffee were just always, kind of core staples that had, if there was inflation that experienced, that one experienced, it was because there was some kind of an issue directly tied to that product. That's not necessarily the case anymore. And I think we've just seen, a lot of inflation. I consider myself very fortunate, very blessed, that when I go to the supermarket, I don't have to stand in the aisle and make a determination of how many products can I actually afford to get, because I've got a limited range of financial resources with which to acquire those goods. And so I'm blessed in that regard, but for a lot of people, that is not the case. And I think there are a lot of folks who are having to make hard decisions right now, and maybe for some time to come.
Our approach to coffee, just so you know, about 6 months ago, Costco had a sale. We like Dunkin' Donuts coffee, and it was a deeply discounted. We bought an obscene amount of coffee. So we couldn't, it would take a year for us to go through the amount of coffee that we bought. The other article, right below that one in the Wall Street Journal, talks about the immediate effect of some of the tax changes on American companies, and particularly in terms of changes in the tax code for depreciation. That AT&T is the example they bring up, said that it will save $1.5 to $2 billion a year this year in tax savings. And extrapolating out to other companies, what do we expect that to have? What effect do we expect that to see in the stock market?
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think part of the reason, one of the things why we had for the past month, the month of July, relative calm, I think was because, to some extent, I refer to as OBA 25, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act of 2025, which, of course, was signed into law July the 4th of this year, so just 1 month ago. And what's interesting about it is, and again, remember this, financial markets, one of the things they do not like is uncertainty. Now that the tax code has certainty, whether it be at the corporate level, as you're referencing, or at the individual level, where tax rates have now been made, and I'm using my air quotes here, tax rates have been made permanent, okay? But again, remember, they're only going to be permanent until the next administration decides that they're no longer permanent. But at least the sunset to tax rates that was originally supposed to occur December 31st of this year, those rates have been extended. And so as a result, what that now creates, I think, for companies, whether it be an individual company like you referenced, or other companies, or for that matter, individuals, families, couples, that what it creates is some level of certainty where they now know what they're dealing with, and so we can move forward, with whether it's particular corporate strategies or even individual strategies. Because I know, frankly, as a result of that bill, we've had a lot of conversation with a lot of clients about a lot of different tax strategies and things we want to start to give consideration to as we go forward, because there have been a number of things that, frankly, folks need to pay attention to that stuff, because there are going to be a number of opportunities that get presented. But if you're not proactive, you will miss those opportunities.
Do tax savings, it's a long article, so I didn't. Apparently, tax savings are accounted for differently than profits. So just because people the companies are making more money, that's not accounted for the same way as profits. So it's not necessarily going toward their share price or toward their earnings ratios. Is that right?
Well, if you think about it, ultimately it is what it eventually does, though, is it is an outflow of capital that is not going to occur for that given expense. Okay, so again, I can't speak to the accounting side of all of that, but ultimately think about this. At the end of the day, eventually, though, those dollars will show up as part of their bottom line anytime any entity, whether it's an individual or corporate entity, reduces what their cost of operation is. So whether it's an income tax burden or whatever, those are ultimately dollars left over that can be reallocated or could be turned into used in a different fashion.
And is it possible, if in fact the messenger Trump shot was correct, and these jobs numbers were bad over the last few months, is it possible we have entered the recession and that has been predicted and we just didn't know about it?
And that's very possible. Make no mistake about that whatsoever. And again, if eventually that proves to be the case, we will have some kind of an emotional knee-jerk reaction, then to that developed story as it would sort of unfold and such. But again, ultimately, and make no mistake, this is one of those where you can take a look around just day to day, whether it's going into a store or driving past. My wife and I were in Ocean City, Maryland over the weekend, and some of the lines at some of the restaurants and the parking lots at the hotels and stuff. Right now you can kind of pretty much conclude, things are moving forward. There's a lot of confidence with a lot of people that they're willing to spend money. Okay. Now, I've also seen, scenarios like that where you can drive by and pretty much walk into any restaurant, with no wait time, or the hotel parking lots are empty. I don't know if you guys saw this over the weekend. I was reading that Las Vegas tourism is down like 11% year over year in Las Vegas. And apparently, and there's a lot of speculation as to why all of that is unfolding. So I think, people will in time, all of these things do influence how people react. So, yeah, if we're at the cusp of that next sort of economic shift, be it a recession, be it a continued expansion, whatever, again, we'll know in the context of time, and people are going to react accordingly.
John, I know you guys don't really like to talk about individual stocks, but there are those 6 big companies right at the top of the market that are just
yes, there are.
big as anything. And, my personal favorite, NVIDIA, is just shooting to the moon, it seems. Does the market go where they go? Do they really dictate what happens? Or, how do you correlate them being so big? When they're down, everything's down. When they're up, it seems that they raise everything up.
Yeah, and here's the way I've always framed this. And I framed the question, Mike, just a little bit differently. People on occasion will ask me, how high can, equity markets go?
Yeah.
Well, if you stop and you think about it, it's infinite. It truly is. But what it's dependent upon is innovation and, someone else's imagination to come up with the next concept, the next, product that will enhance our lives to such an extent that we all have to have it. And, you think about this thing that's sitting on the table in front of me here. We refer to it as a phone, okay? It's not a phone. Well, it's a pocket computer that you can make phone calls on.
Yeah.
And stop and think about, if I think back to, my grandparents, the whole notion for them, I'll be 64 here soon, so, my grandparents, of course, born, back around 1900, in the late 1890s, early 1900s. That whole notion of having a device that you carry in your pocket that you can, pull out of your pocket and call any person in the world, get any information anywhere in the world, send the message anywhere in the world, would be absolutely mind-boggling. So my point is, when you stop and you think about it, what is that next great innovation, discovery that will come into play? Artificial intelligence, make no mistake, is beginning to have an influence on how people think about things and how we approach things. Now, again, the sky really is the limit. It's only limited to someone's imagination. So that's why I always tell people, if you stop and think about this, whether it's a half a dozen companies kind of leading the charge, and make no mistake with what I'm about to say, the day and time will come when those half dozen will probably get displaced by somebody else. Because you go back throughout time, 20 years ago, those 5, 6, 7 companies would not have been the leading, the group leading the charge. Go back 20 years prior to that, et cetera, et cetera. And you keep going back far enough in time and you find, steel companies and railroads and heavy industrial type of businesses were leading the U.S. economy. And whereas today it's more, technology-based. But again, 20 years from now, 40 years from now, who knows, what's going to be leading the charge.
John, we got about 30 seconds left. Go ahead and plug the firm. Tell people how they can get a hold of you and where you are.
Yeah, the Mears Group is located at 1270 Winchester Avenue, right here in Martinsburg, West Virginia. We're just a few doors south of the busiest intersection in Berkeley County. Or you can reach us by phone at area code 304-263-4343.
Thank you so much, John. And that intersection now has 4 lanes. I went through there in under 2 minutes. yesterday, or Saturday, should I say.
Yeah, that's Saturday, though.
You are listening to WRNR and watching us on TV 10. We'll be right back after these messages.